All right, we are ready to go. Well, good morning again, everybody. This is our session. I'll let Bev introduce herself. She's my co-host today, but as probably most of you know, my name is Jason Martinheiner here at Keystone AEA, and Bev and I are offering our session today around phenomenal science, about what makes for a scientific phenomenon to be academically productive and hopefully what we can do to get kids asking questions. Bev, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, so I work with Jason at Keystone. I support him in science as well as STEM, tech, and some college and career readiness stuff. So lots of good things, but most importantly, let's get into some phenomena. And I know everyone's singing that song in their head right now.
Yeah, if you're not a Muppets fan with phenomena, you'll get there eventually, that's for sure. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here in just a moment. So we've got a few slides as some talking points. For those of you who are new to Zoom, just as a reminder, across the bottom of your Zoom screen, you're going to have a couple useful buttons. One is your mute and unmute button. So as you joined the breakout room, it was automatically set to mute your microphone because we all have a lot of stuff going on probably at our house. So that just mutes you right away, but you can always unmute to ask questions. You can also make use of the chat button. So the chat button will be there at the bottom as well. You can pop that open and type us a message, certainly to let us know if you're lost, because I know this is a new technology for some, or if we're going too fast or too slow. You can use either the reactions to do that or the chat window. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And we'll get into presentation mode here. Once I get all my windows out of the way. Okay, if I can maybe just get a thumbs up from some folks who are able to see the phenomenal science screen. I don't want to leave anybody behind. Can people see that? All right, good. Okay, well, just as a heads up for everyone, as we mentioned, the session is being recorded. We're doing this for multiple reasons. One is because not everybody maybe could make this time work. And so we'll be able to have those online for people to access later. And then hopefully you'll also access it as well. As you're doing your own professional learning, you can come across we'll go back to the recording to reference any pieces there. So just as a heads up, we're going ahead and recording these sessions. A few norms. Bev, you want to jump into this part?
Sure. So as we're going through, we have lots of different conversations. You're going to be working in breakout rooms with a lot of folks. So we just wanted to set up some kind of grounding guidelines for us. So the first one, step in, we'll be present. We're part of these conversations. Everyone kind of do their part. Everyone has some great ideas to be sharing. So let's make sure that they're heard. Again, with that step back, let all voices be heard, and then we're always solution focused. So we are also looking at not only what is phenomena, but how can we utilize this in the future, and letting everybody kind of have their voice in that too. All right, so we're going to take a look at some of just the session guiding questions. So what is phenomena? So what makes a really great launching phenomena? And sometimes we call that an anchoring phenomena, which we'll do for the rest of this time. And then how do we activate student inquiry? What are we going to do to make sure that we have academically productive questions? We know that kids can generate lots of questions, but how do we have a phenomena that can really get them to think about the science that's happening within that phenomena?
So as Bev and I were talking about this session, it's actually kind of a redo of one we did at KPEC a while ago. We kind of landed on this big thing that, at least for me, is the big shift that we see in our not so new science standards. Sometimes I catch myself to say, not really the new science standards. We've been working on these for the past 5 years now. But what I kind of think is the big move is this shift from just learning about science topics to really figuring out what's going on. If I had to find one phrase to sum up the largest change with these standards as opposed to ones that we used to use, the National Science Education Standard, it is this shift to really focus on getting kids engaged in figuring things out rather than just learning a series of disconnected facts. Scientists really engage in these mainly through the cross-cutting concepts and the science and engineering practices. So we have that piece that's there, and the DCIs, of course, are present all the time. And that's those facts and the content. But by having kids engage with the science and engineering practices, things like asking questions, analyzing data, communicating information, and then utilizing the cross-cutting concepts, looking for patterns, using energy and systems, cause and effect, all those things can help them make sense of science as well. So by combining all three dimensions, we hopefully allow for students to really get that in-depth understanding rather than just the surface bit around the facts. And one of the main engagement pieces we use to do that are phenomena. That's another big word that I'm sure you've run across as you've been engaging in professional learning around science. So we figured we'd start off with a question. What exactly is a phenomenon? When we talk about a phenomenon, what are we talking about? And one of the things that we've discussed frequently is that a phenomenon doesn't have to be phenomenal. It can be a regular everyday thing as long as it gets us to where we want to go. So in that sense, I'm going to go ahead and share a video. Now I am going to stop my share just briefly because I am not 100% convinced that I turned on the audio. So I'm going to double check that. And we're going to go ahead and give this a try. I'd appreciate a thumbs up if you're hearing the audio okay, or if there's a problem, let us know. Let's go ahead, take a look at this video. It's an ad, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Hey, it's Anissa and Joe, and today we've got for you the rapid defrosting tray. This is something that every kitchen should have.
You know, I'm a big meat eater. I've got steaks and pork chops and a couple of chicken halves in my freezer. But, you know, I constantly forget to take food out the night before to defrost.
Yeah, and then you come home, and who wants to wait 2-3 hours when you come home from work to cook something?
That's the great thing about this defrosting tray is it will defrost your food in half the time it normally would.
It's true. We don't know how it works, but it really does work. Let me show you how. I'm putting this ice cube on here, and look at this. It's working instantly. Think about what this will do for your steaks, your chicken, your pork chops. Half the time. We did a test where we did an ice cube on this and an ice cube on the counter, and look at the difference. In 15 minutes, this completely melted while the other is still melting.
This is a lot faster.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop our share for just a moment so we can see each other's faces. So quick little video, that kind of standard like, wow, that's amazing. So a few questions that I want to pose to the group, and you can utilize the chat or you can utilize that unmute feature, which is totally fine. What might be some science ideas that could be connected to this phenomenon? Go ahead and either use the chat or feel free to unmute yourself. I'm curious, what would be some science concepts that might kick off some questions for students? Thanks, Tracy. Thermal conductivity, one idea. Temperature, thanks, Megan. Ooh, Diane, bonding types. Can you expand on that for us a little bit, Diane? I see you've got bonding types in the chat. Feel free to make use of the mute button if you want to unmute yourself.
In chemistry, we discussed different bond types that occur in different substances, like from metal to metal versus metal to nonmetal. And metallic bonds allow that activity to go on because they're good at conducting heat and electricity and so on.
Awesome. Thanks for expanding on that for us. See change of state. We've got some inquiry on there. Do you think kids would have questions about that video after seeing it? If so, what might be some of the questions that they would generate? Again, feel free to pop the mic open if you want to toss those out or use the chat. Oh yeah, is it warmer? What's the tray made? How does this work? Is it heated? Yeah, so keep them coming as they look at that, and I would definitely replay the video, right? So as kids are having questions like, let's take a little look, because like, is it heated? that would be a question. Like, I didn't see any cords, like I didn't see it plugged into anything, so that's interesting. What's going on? How hot is the surface? Yeah, power source, I see that link there. So already, as I'm seeing people kind of type things in, you're generating a lot of questions. There's a ton of questions that are coming out of just this short little 1-minute video. Color, what makes it work fast, all those kinds of pieces are showing up in our chat. So that's what would be the big part about this being instructionally productive, is that it's generating a lot of questions, and it's generating not only just a lot of questions, but a lot of questions that we can answer in a science classroom. We can start to do some investigations and start to learn about these things to try to answer those questions. So instead of me posing a bunch of questions, ideally the questions are coming from the students. And if my goal is to kick off a unit around thermal conductivity or conductors versus insulators or those kinds of pieces, the kids are generating the questions that I wanted them to ask anyway, right? So I have picked something that's bringing out the questions that allows me to move forward with the instructional unit basically along the lines of where I was going in the first place. So those are the pieces there. I will, I'll kind of hide the answer to this one. If you want to research it, you certainly can. There's some nice science behind why that does work. It's not a trick. I mean, it does in fact allow things to, I guess, defrost faster, and it has all to do with the material that's in there. The slide, and we'll be sharing the presentation with everybody as well, that I'm kind of working off of, has some links that are useful. I'll go ahead and do some screen sharing again and get back into presentation mode. So we were just talking about these questions, and the STEM teaching tool that's linked at the bottom, we'll make sure is present in the useful links if it's not already there. I would highly recommend checking out the STEM teaching tools website if you haven't looked at these resources. It's a lot of nice key pieces around the shifts in the science standards that this site digs into. In fact, on one of the tabs on the spreadsheet that you use to sign up for this session, there's an entire self-paced learning section, and the STEM teaching tool PD playlists are a part of that. So if you're looking for additional resources to make use of for your own professional learning, check out those PD playlists that are linked on the self-paced learning tab in the spreadsheet. All right, I'm gonna pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions. This has been a lot of talking at you so far. So what are you thinking about? Any questions out there in the Zoom world? Wait time is even harder online. All right, so great. Well, hopefully you feel comfortable just jumping in, dropping questions in the chat, or unmuting that microphone as you have it. So what we just looked at was an example of something that may not drive an entire unit of instruction. It might be a smaller piece around whether it be bonding or thermal conductivity. People were mentioning phase change. I mean, all those kinds of things might be places where kids would kind of generate questions. But what we're going to jump into now is maybe something that would be more of an anchoring phenomenon, something that's a little more large scale that might generate a few more questions. I'm going to go ahead and pop back into here, and I'll turn it over to Bev.
Yeah, so we're actually going to have you go through and engage in the anchoring phenomena that we have here. So if you have a sheet of paper near you or somewhere to jot notes on your computer, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to take a look at our anchoring phenomena. So at the bottom, I've just got some quick things. What do you notice and what do you wonder about the two pictures that are on the top of this slide? Is it something that you've ever seen or experienced yourself? And is there anything that you would like to kind of take notes about just based on those two pictures? So without much more information, I'm just going to send this over to you. Like I said, I'll check back in a couple minutes, but I'll have you take some notes. We're not going to have you put them in the chat this time because we're going to use this as an anchor for an entire unit. We want you to see how that is going to be facilitated through. So like I said, take a moment, notes on your own, and then we'll come back together quick. All right, I will have you wrap up the thought that you were on. All right, so we've started with the question generation, these two different pictures that we've got represented on the screen. If Jason goes to the next slide, we're going to actually use those questions that you generated. We always want to start with things that are personal to you, because in science, we also want students to bring in their own experiences so that they can start connecting to some of the science content that you're going to be sharing with them. And so we're going to use a technique called the Question Formulation Technique. It's pretty simple. We've got some step-by-step features that we're going to go through with you just to kind of figure out how to facilitate that information. So we're going to have students generate those questions, but it allows them, like I said, to bring themselves to the conversation. These are my experiences. These are things that are related to the example that we have. And so we want to encourage that the more. Okay, Jason, next. So here are the components that we've gone through. So we've got the Q focus. The Q focus were the two pictures that we had shared. I'm going to give you, we've got some rules for producing those questions. So right now you've produced them. We'll go through and categorize them. We'll prioritize them. We'll also get into some next steps. How do we use those questions and how do we scaffold those so that it's student questions that are driving some of the investigations you have in your classroom? And then we'll reflect on that process. All right, so here was the first thing that I had you do. So we went through and produced lots of different questions. Ask as many questions as you can. Don't stop to judge. We're just getting those questions out. Later on, you can start to delete or cross them off as maybe students don't feel that they fit anymore. But we can also change those questions to a statement, and we'll have you do that in just a little bit. All right.
All right, Bev, do you want to explain what's about to happen here as I set up our breakout rooms?
Yeah, so we're about to send you into some different breakouts. So utilizing those questions that you just created, we're actually going to share a Google Doc. So on the document that Jason had just shared, I want you to pay attention to the breakout room that he sends you to. You'll notice we have breakout room documents as that first resource link. When he sends you to one, you're going to need to know which document to click on. So what will happen is a window is going to pop up and it'll say sending you to breakout room either 1, 2, 3, or 4. Make sure that you kind of pay attention to that and then go to the document that he put in the chat to click on the appropriate Google Doc that you should be able to edit. From there, we're going to have you actually typing on there as a team each of the questions that you generated. Okay, and then we'll maybe have little bits of talking, like if you have the same question, maybe putting those together so that they are one question. Did I miss anything, JMH?
No, I think we're doing good. Feel free to introduce yourself when you get into your breakout room, you know, who you are, where you're from, to the rest of the crew. And then, yeah, start working on those questions. We'll be bopping in and helping people out. If you have any trouble, I'll be coming back to this main room and get you into a breakout room as quickly as we can. So just keep in mind when that message comes up, go ahead and click accept or go or whatever the button is, and then you'll want to join the Google Doc for your breakout room. I think this next section is about maybe 5 minutes or so, Bev, is that right?
It's about 5 minutes and then we'll call you back.
All right, we'll give you a heads up on that. Here we go. We're going to open up the rooms. Right, welcome back. People popping back in. Hopefully that was pretty successful, or you had a chance to meet a few new folks and start generating those questions on the Google Docs. Certainly, let us know if you're having any trouble with technology. We don't want that to be a barrier in this new environment. We're all learning new stuff, right? So hopefully we all feel safe asking questions and moving along. So awesome. I quickly popped into each group just to make sure we were moving things along, and I want to make sure everyone gets back into the main session here. But hopefully you were able to generate a lot of questions, kind of coming out of that bit. And I was just chatting with Bev, and it sounds like in one of the groups, talking about how this technique really isn't age specific, right? I mean, this could be used with high schoolers, it could be used with middle schoolers, it could be used with elementary kids, pre-K. I mean, kids love to ask questions, right? I think in some ways they start maybe not asking as many questions as they get older for whatever reason. I won't make any claims as to why that is, but getting them to ask questions is really key to moving things forward. So you now have a huge list of questions. Bev, did you want to say something? You looked like you were about to say something. No, okay. Trying to read the nonverbal, sorry. All right, so you have a ton of questions, right? And if we were in person, we probably would have done this in more of like on poster paper or something like that. But we're gonna keep going with our Google Docs. So we're gonna send you back into the breakout rooms for another chunk of time to continue with this, but with a few more directions. So not only do scientists ask questions and kids ask questions, but sometimes they tend to ask one type or the other. And there are two general categories we usually talk about with the QFT and questions. Those would be closed-ended questions. Those are typically answered with just a single yes or no, or maybe a one-word answer. And then open-ended questions, things that are a little more broad-based. It's going to require a longer explanation in order to get to those answers. I would shy away from saying that one type of question is better than the other. They both have their own purposes, right? So sometimes closed-ended questions are really important because they help us to drive to a particular fact or something that's going to be important to expand on. And open-ended questions, of course, let us explore a little bit more. So when you go back into your breakout rooms, we'd like you to go through and mark the closed-ended questions with a C and open-ended questions with an O, just to kind of see how the breakdown was. If your group were asking more closed-ended versus open-ended questions. We're also going to use this as a way to produce more questions by changing some of the question types. So the challenge will be is that once you've gone ahead and marked all of your questions as these are either closed or open-ended questions, we're going to challenge you to choose one closed-ended question and change it into an open-ended question. So how could we rephrase this closed-ended question to be more open? And likewise, pick one of your open-ended questions and reword it to change it into a closed-ended question. And don't actually like edit the question itself, like add another bullet and reword. If you want to somehow link them together, feel free to use a font color or something if you want to keep track of which question you did. But this is a way that kids can generate even more questions by using the ones they've already generated. So we're going to go ahead and send you back into your sessions. You're going to do this process, and then finally, you're going to prioritize kind of your top 5. What 5 questions do we think are the most important to answer? Not that we won't try to answer all of them, but what 5 really rise to the top? Maybe they're questions that a lot of people had. Maybe it was a question that someone said and everyone else was like, oh, yeah, that's a good question. Go ahead and highlight that. Make a mark of which of those 5 questions, because we're going to make use of those here in a little bit. Yeah, if you need to kind of keep them in place, write them down or whatever, the end goal is to then have 5 big questions for your group. So goals here in just a moment. You're going to work together to categorize your questions as closed or open. You're then going to pick at least one closed and make it an open-ended, and one open and make it a closed. And then come to consensus as a group on 5 big questions you think are really important if we're going to try to figure out what's going on with these pictures. that make sense for everyone? Maybe a little thumbs up so I know we're on the same page. Awesome, great. All right, well, we're gonna be heading off then again to our breakout rooms. So here we go. We'll give you about 10, 15 minutes or so to get through this work. Here we go. All right, it looks like people are almost all back in, so welcome back. I hope you had some good discussions there in your breakout rooms. And one of the things that we've talked about is hopefully in this experience, not only are you picking up a few things for your own classroom in regards to just questioning and that kind of piece, but maybe you're learning a few tech tips and tricks as well. The kind of side benefit of engaging with this. All right, Bev, I'm going to go ahead and bring up our Jamboard, speaking of tech tools and tips, and you can talk about where we're going with this next step. All right.
All right, friends. So what we're going to do next is, you're probably familiar with Padlet. And so Jamboard is something that is within Google that you can just get when you go to Google Drive. It's a pull down where we would normally get documents. Did we get Zoom coffee breaks? Shoop, you're awesome. Not today. From the comfort of your home, if you have that. All right, so we've got a phenomenal question jam. So off to the left-hand side, you can see that Jason's got a bunch of different options that we've got to choose from. The one that I'm going to have you utilizing is the Post-it note. So if Jason goes over to the left-hand side, the one that looks, yep, just like that, the sticky note, he's gonna click on that and then just type in your question. This is awesome, no, question mark, Martin but that is how it functions. So within your groups, what you had highlighted 5 questions that you thought were your most important questions. And so with that Jamboard, we're going to share the link in the chat. We're inviting you to just add your 5 questions to the jam, just like he added it there, clicking on the sticky note and adding your 5. And I will add that to the chat here quick. And we should quickly see everyone populating those questions right away. So if you head over to the chat, I'll have everyone just log in. Actually, you just click on it, it's open. And add your 5 questions. Now, this is open to anyone, so you can move them around wherever you would like to be. You can change the colors if you choose to. It's just a fun little tool. Like I said, similar to Padlet. We'll get everybody in there quick. And let's add your questions.
Great question. Aaron's asking about everyone or one per group. So this is where we'd like to get those 5 questions that your group decided were really important onto the Jamboard. And maybe that's a collaborative effort or something, or maybe the person who is recording can do some copying and pasting, but that's the main thing that we're gonna wanna do is make sure those questions show up. Bev, if you don't mind, I might just toss out, how about group 1? You wanna put your questions in the upper left-hand corner. So group 1 can be posting their questions in the upper left. Group 2, maybe upper right. Group 3, lower left. Group 4, lower right. Then that way we can make sure that all the questions get recorded from each group. How does that sound?
That is perfect.
while we're filling those out, kind of do a little teacher hat thing. Bev and I have been doing a lot of things with the Open SciEd curriculum. It's a middle school open sourced, open ed curriculum that's being used by some various pilot teachers and other teachers across the state of Iowa. And one of the things that oftentimes comes up about student questioning is, how do we handle all the questions? Like, there's gonna be a lot of questions in order to kind of get through. So one of the techniques that we just used was a way to have some student voice where everybody got to put their questions out as part of a small group. But then by prioritizing, hopefully we're able to narrow the field a little bit. So we're kind of going through this filtering process where we still honor the questions that all the kids have, but maybe they can come to some consensus by this point about which ones might be the most important for us to get at the bottom line here, really trying to figure out what's going on with this. Nice job. Go ahead and keep going. I see we've got group 4's got their 5 questions. Go ahead and keep plugging away, and then we'll talk about these in just a minute. It's like we're getting close. I'll toss out one quick discussion question as we kind of wrap up those last bits. Does anyone want to weigh in? I'm curious. Did you find that your group generated more closed-ended questions or more open-ended questions, or were they about the same? So as we give the groups the time to just get their last few questions, anyone want to weigh in? Did you feel like they were more closed, more open, or were they about the same?
Jason, with ours, we get it about the same, but we found out that our closed ones, we could generate so many more questions from them, and that's why we're having a hard time getting our 5 up there. But because we were having some pretty darn good discussion as we were going, so that's why you see a couple of questions in some of my sticky notes too.
Oh, thanks, Joan. That's totally fine. You know, we're kind of doing this on an accelerated schedule too, right? Like this, I could easily see this whole process being an entire class period where you're generating the questions, and we're going to do some sorting here in a little bit. Thanks for sharing. Anybody else? Okay, well, it looks like we've got questions for everybody. Awesome. So now, Bev, I think what we're going to do is maybe we're going to start looking for some themes, right?
Yep, definitely. So let's take maybe one of the questions that we have. Does anyone want to offer a question from one of their groups to maybe get us started? What was a question that you guys thought were, yeah, this is awesome? How about I start? All right, so let's take a look at, and I'm just gonna take one of the sticky notes and we're just gonna start moving them over. So let's take a look at how does it compare to 2008. So that seems to be from group 1. Did any other group have something similar to, how does it compare to 2008? And if you did have that in your little pod of sticky notes, could you move it closer to the one that I just moved? So this one right here. If you had something similar, could you move your own sticky note over to something similar, close to that? Okay, so we had another group. How does it compare to the floods of 93 or 08? Did anyone else have something similar? Okay, so within those two, okay, we've got 3. Have these areas flooded before? And if so, when and why? Okay. Any other related question? All right, so let's take a look at that pod. We can always build back to them. Okay, was flooding in both areas unexpected or why? Any other related questions? So within that grouping, so right now we have 5 questions that we feel should be clumped together. What can we call that particular grouping? Is there a common maybe concept or a theme, or why are they grouped together? Why did we choose that?
I think it's compare and contrast.
Okay. Any other reasons why we did?
They're all discussing the severity of the flood.
Okay.
Bev, you're amazing using the writing tool. You're doing way better than I could possibly do trying to write with my mouse.
I do have my iPad out and it's still questionable right now when you write on the screen, so. All right, so for this one, we are, oh, I'll fix that. So compare, contrast, and we've got some severity with that too. Let's do that again. Does anyone have a question that might start another grouping for us?
No,
Who
Bev.
has one?
Yeah, I was looking through these. I see the word cause showing up in a couple of different notes. Like I see one that what would the causes and effects be to the ecosystems? I see what are some things that could have or what might have been the cause of the flooding. I don't know. What do you think? Do we see some things that are related to causes?
All right.
Tying in with that, you have could have been prevented. So if you know the cause, you're asking, can you prevent it?
I agree with that.
All right, so I'm going to move some of these questions. Let's put them together. So we seem to have causes.
Would the one with how much rain go with that?
And is this from a spring flood or after heavy rains could go with it too?
With the remaining stickies, do we have another theme that's kind of popped up?
Well, if we're doing cause, then I think the next one should be effect.
Okay.
And it's talking about drinking water contamination and fertilizer runoff.
How are people getting basic needs? And
Okay, let's cluster those over by effect. What about, yep, I was just going to ask about that one. How close together geographically are these two images? Does that fit into a category that we currently have, or is that maybe something different?
I would say there's probably more of cause.
Mhm.
And I would think the drinking water contamination is more of an effect. You have it under severity and compare and contrast.
Okay, so let's start, like Jim talked about, let's start moving some of the things that maybe we had originally in severity or compare contrast. They may now fit into a different category that we've identified. So you feel free to move anything that you see that maybe needs to move to a different spot. All right, any other stragglers? All right, so it looks like we've got three separate categories we've broken them into. The number one, the severity. I don't think I spelled that right, I apologize. We've got the severity of the issue with a compare contrast. So we're looking at comparative data. You've also got what are some of the causes and what are some of the effects of that. So that's considered our initial sort based on that anchoring phenomena. So now if Jason goes back.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, I was gonna maybe, yeah, jump into the next bit. We'll go back. I think we'll go to the next slide you're thinking of in just a second. So just because we have this sitting here in front of us right now. So I want to pose the question to the group then. So if we want to start investigating this, does anyone want to toss out maybe a starting point? We have a lot of questions here, but given kind of how we've sorted things, does anyone want to propose where we might kick off, whether it's investigations or it's research or those kinds of pieces? Feel free to unmute or hit the chat.
like, do you want a specific question or a group of questions?
It could be a group of questions. It could be a specific question. We're just having a discussion here. Yeah.
Because I think you would start with the causes.
Okay. Any agreement? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop the share just so we can see everybody. What do you think?
In my head, I see causes, I agree.
I
And
agree.
then going to the severity and then to the effect would be, in my head, that's the way it would go.
Yeah, I agree. That's where my mind was going to.
Saw a thumbs up from Mike there. He got his little reaction in. Awesome. Good. I'm seeing a lot of nods. So it sounds like we're feeling pretty comfortable with if we're gonna try to figure out what was really happening at those pictures, maybe we better figure out the causes, like what causes flooding. And then once we understand that, we can make some headway. That sound like a good synopsis or summary of what we were talking about or where we might want to go? All right. Okay. Now I'm going to hop back there, Bev. And if you want to talk about this slide.
Yeah, so Jason and I have done this with a previous group, and it's interesting, same anchoring phenomena, very similar questions to what you had proposed. Their categories are a little different. They wanted to break them out into causes, as you had. They wanted to do some investigations around the geography of where this was happening, the different types of the impacts that the flooding was having, and then what are some preventative ways that we can support that. But interesting, the questions, if he were to zoom in, are very similar to the ones that you had too. They just decided to categorize. I think he can zoom. They just decided to categorize a little bit. So that is the beauty of it. So independent of the different classes that you might have, the questions that are generated become pretty consistent.
Sorry, Bev, I failed in my Zoom.
No, you're totally fine. But it's always interesting when you have a really strong academically productive phenomena, how those questions just kind of meld themselves together. And they become really science questions that can be investigated and driven by kids too.
Yeah, so that ends up being the other big thing is, you know, I posed this question to the group, like, where do we need to do first? Where should we go? And it seemed as if everyone was like, well, maybe we better understand the causes first and kind of move forward. Well, this slide here was exactly what this phenomenon is designed to kind of kick off for the unit. So the unit is all designed around, all right, first we're going to investigate the causes, then we're going to learn a little bit about, you know, how does that impact the geography, what's the impact in terms of human impact, and then how can we work on preventing it. So even though it felt really like, wow, how did we know where this was going to go? By picking the appropriate anchoring phenomenon, we actually had really a free form, organically produced set of questions that actually was going to follow along what the unit design was anyway. So that's one of the hallmarks, I think, of designing units around a good, strong anchoring phenomenon, so that it may seem like it's accidental, and certainly for the kids, it's going to be like, wow, like we're kind of investigating the stuff we want to learn about. But it was very intentional. Like it was exactly what we wanted to accomplish anyway in regards to the standards and all the stuff we have to think about as teachers.
And Jason, too, I love, because you often talk about the science and engineering practices, the cross-cutting concepts, and how they were naturally, like asking questions and defining problems. We did those naturally within the questions that we derived, and even getting into the cross-cutting concepts, cause and effect, those types of things. So it's always fun when they naturally come about and how they kind of support those investigations moving forward.
I'm going to stop my share again and just kind of put the question out to the group. So we kind of put you in what we would call student hat for this chunk of time, like kind of thinking about what would students do and doing some modeling. But we'll go ahead and take that hat off and kind of put teacher hat back on. So what are some of the things you talked about either in your small group or that you're thinking about now around how this could be useful in your own classroom? Like, what did you like about the technique? What seemed to go well? What might be some things that were like, maybe not as well? So debrief this, or we'll talk about it as teachers now. What did you see that would have been productive for use in your own classroom, or what other questions do you have?
I think effective discussion over main concept points, or even as an intro.
So you're saying as a nice way to kind of kick things off, Mike? Is that what you're talking about?
Right. If it's a concept they've already learned, or maybe we're going to build off of it, or kind of as a mid-check waypoint, I can see it used in multiple different ways there.
I also thought that there's a lot of good group discussion, trying to kind of make your statements concise on what you were trying to come to agreement with questions when we started. There's a lot of good communication within groups as well.
Aaron's got a question about what this might look like in a kindergarten classroom. So how might it be different? Aaron, if you don't mind unmuting, what are some things you're thinking about in terms of the barriers or the opportunities that might happen in a kindergarten classroom with this technique?
Well, I mean, like if I were to show my kindergarten those two pictures and say, what do you want to know? I mean, chances are they would not be on task at all. You know, they would ask questions about superheroes or something like that.
Great.
I don't know that we could come up with enough questions to, sort out into different groups.
Yeah, my gut on this would be that it would probably look quite a bit different, right? I mean, we're dealing with students who aren't necessarily going to be able to efficiently write their own questions down. So one thing I'll toss out, and I'll encourage people in the group to weigh in. This may be more of having a little turn and talk like turn talk to a partner about questions that you have, and then you as a teacher collecting some of these questions. So you're modeling how you would be doing some writing. So I think about an ELA connection is we're gonna write this down and do some modeling on how we're gonna record these. And so it's more of a group board that's being written by the teacher, and then you go through some process of trying to select out what might be the key questions. Now, knowing where you're going is really important. You might be able to emphasize and de-emphasize questions in a real subtle way, recording questions. And when you hear things, at least when I use these driving question boards, I'm listening for certain things. So if I want to make sure we're going to go down the route of cause, I'm really going to be listening for as soon as a student grabs onto the idea of cause, like what, I'm really wondering what the cause of this is. Like, oh, interesting. Was anybody else wondering about what the cause is? And then that might give a little head nod and some, oh yeah. Okay, well then let's write that down and go from there. That's my kind of off the hip idea. Bev or anybody else have any ideas about how this might look in a lower elementary or elementary classroom?
I think
was
the
thinking-
questions,
oh.
sorry, Mike.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I think the questions could be different, like, what do you see, instead of what questions do you have in your head, but like actually having the kids name, like, I see water. Okay, is that normal? Like, do you think this is normal? Like having questions like that they might be able to answer a little bit better and then lead to some further discussion.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar, just, doing a little bit more emphasis on comparing the two pictures first, or comparing a flooded picture versus a not flooded picture, and then maybe moving on from there, and maybe even using a whole different set of pictures. Like I don't know that you have to use flooded things. It might be something a little more age appropriate, whatever that would be.
In STEMifying, we've been using a book called Flood. It's a wordless book, but it really scaffolds kids to understanding how it impacts families, how it impacts the environment, but all wordless. So they have to come up with what's happening. It's a little more scaffolded than just an open, so that you can have them talking through. They could turn and talk, or you could create the anchor charts as to what do we see, what do we know, kind of going from there too. So still a related concept, but that one scaffolds it a little bit more page by page and gets into the interactions too.
Thank you. Those are some awesome ideas.
And would you want to do, how do we feel about this? How would we want to fix this with little ones? Because that would get them to even that curiosity to come out and really want to fix this for their mommy and daddy, for their family to be safe, and their puppy even to be safe.
Yeah, that would tie into the social emotional goals, definitely.
Erin, I love that you brought up the social emotional goals, because that's also been a thing I've been kind of excited about, is when we look at these shifts in classroom culture and how we run things in science, because science is very much a social endeavor. Having kids engage in these small groups where they're asking questions, they need to listen to one another, they need to come to compromise. That's right in line with all of the social emotional objectives that we have without having it be an add-on. It's a very authentic way to engage in learning in the classroom, but also practice and work on those other pieces.
I'd have a little caution if you're in an area that does flood, especially with the younger kids, that you might have some that have had some negative experiences with this. Not that I'd say that you don't want to expose them to the thought process, but be aware that that might come up.
Thanks very much for that, Diane. That's exactly, you're right on. So being aware of your own local conditions and situations, and that providing a phenomenon like this to investigate may require a little processing at first to kind of get that emotional connection out, and that chance to kind of go through that and then engaging with it. Thanks for that note.
Thinking about this from a non-scientific standpoint, this can be applied in any curriculum. And so this could be something that maybe comes naturally to a science teacher, but maybe it doesn't come as naturally to a social studies or a art teacher or whatever. And so it would be a really good opportunity to help other teachers in your district on how to kind of approach this questioning and answering and keeping things open for the kids.
Yeah, we've seen it a lot in science and social studies, but I think you're right on there, man. It's really could be any area. In fact, I think there might even be another QFT session being offered by another group. If you want to investigate this a little bit more or hear some different perspectives on it, I would encourage you. It might even be this afternoon. I don't remember. Okay, well, I want to honor our time. I see we're at 10:20. We just have a few more things to touch on, and then we'll send you on your way. So I'll go back to sharing my screen again. So we talked about a little bit on regards to what we kind of figured out or where we might go from here in activating student questions. Let's see, Bev, we're going to chat a little bit about this structure then. We kind of talked about it, but if you want to expand a little.
Yeah, so one of the structures that we have, we've already started with the question and that phenomena/activity. So really getting students' questions out and then defining what are we trying to figure out. So we're doing all of that together. What do we need to figure out in order to understand this a little bit more? And then it also goes into, you know, why does this matter? So we know that we want an anchoring phenomena or just the unit itself to have things that are community-based, sometimes personal or societal interests with them, that human impact being prevalent throughout the standards. And then figuring out the navigation, as you already did, we talked about with those questions, probably starting with the causes, going to severity, and then ending with what are some of the effects and impacts that we have. This is just a nice little structure for that.
Yeah. I saw my little chat thing popped up, so I was just checking on it. Tying in, so Cheryl's mentioning tying in phenomenon to class, try to reference it back to it often enough to make it as effective. Yeah, so having that piece and referencing it back requires a ton of planning. And that's where looking at examples of where we've had or curriculum that have been designed around a phenomenon. So some of the things from Open Science would be one. I've got some other resources that I'd be happy to share. Maybe I'll drop them. I'll make a note to myself. I'll drop them on the resource document. If you just want to see more examples of how a phenomenon has been tied in and referenced back frequently, that might help out in terms of doing it in your own classroom. It's tough. I mean, it's really hard to do this designing around an anchoring phenomenon. Sometimes you find that what you think is really engaging for kids may not be as engaging. And so I'll make sure to drop that in the references link too. So a little bit, I mean, I'm a scientist, right? So I would be remiss in not doing a little bit of data referencing here. I've been part of a group, a science writing heuristic. Dr. Brian Hand has been doing some investigating around the use of writing and questioning in science classrooms to look at the impact. So I know it's like you look at this graph, like, well, what is this trying to tell us? It's a little bit of graphing on links between the skills of induction and deduction, an assumption, and how it has an impact on science specifically, is what they were looking at first. So impact being on the y-axis there on different things. So how well can a student do either induction or deduction, and how that might impact the science score is one piece. But the more important one I want to show you is this next chart. So what you're looking at is kind of a correlation value in the parentheses and the impact with the other one. So what they were able to do is by using I believe it's the Cornell inductive reasoning, I got the name wrong. The assessment allows us to kind of sort students into how well they are at doing induction and deduction. And really, when we talk about questioning and the ability to generate good questions, it's really a reflection of their induction ability. So they're looking at something and they're able to pose questions about why that might be going on, or what are things that might be affecting what we're looking at. And actually the premise was that deduction, the ability to synthesize and to put things together, would be a bigger indicator. And it actually turns out that induction is much more important, and not only in science, but in math and reading as well. So if you look at that bottom line, the students that had strong induction and very strong deduction skills had a high correlation and a high impact on their success in science, math, and reading on Iowa testing. So helping kids to develop the skills to generate strong questions, and of course, being able to then synthesize the information that comes out of that questioning in order to be able to make conclusions, has huge impacts, not just in science, but also in math and reading as well, which is where I get up on my little platform and continue to emphasize that we need to try to not put science on the sideline, especially in elementary schools. But the work that we do in science around questioning and analyzing data and communicating information has payoffs in math and reading as well. So just a little bit of data there, and I'd be happy if you want to know more about this to share some resources along those lines as well. Bev, you want to talk about these resources as we kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, so we'll also be posting these on the science website, but we have NGSS Phenomena. If you were to go to that, it has just a wealth of different ideas to spark student questioning and to connect to some of the things that you might be teaching. There's also the Phenomena Finder, Wonders of Science, also just wonderful resources to get kids thinking about it. And I know Jason is going to be adding some things with some units that you might be interested in looking at for their structure. So whether it's OpenSciEd or even NGSS Storylines, which uses that phenomena-based practice from kindergarten all the way up.
Well, I think that hits what we were hoping to accomplish today on that Google document that you've been accessing all through our session. There's kind of that resources place. We'll drop a few more things in there, including a link to this presentation. I saw that in the chat. So you'll have access to that as well. But with that, I guess thanks for joining us. Hopefully you found this to be a successful kickoff to this experiment we're all doing around online professional learning and engaging with each other across the miles. Any last questions or things that you're wondering about? All right, well, thanks for joining us. As I mentioned, hopefully you're able to find some other topics that you're interested in exploring, and we're gonna continue to look at things. We're already thinking about next week and what might be on the docket. So please, I'll speak for you too, Bev, I'm sure. Please reach out to us if you have any questions or you want to expand on what we talked about, or if what you're engaging with on your own professional learning time could use a little bit of help, or you're looking for resources, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yep, and if there's topics that you'd like to see for next week, Jason and I are always open to that too. So just anything you need, just send it our way.
All right, great to see everybody. I'm going to go ahead and stop our